Hi, my name is Michele Gazzola. I'm a researcher at the University of Humboldt in Berlin. I came here this morning to hear a lecture, but the guy did not show up, so I was asked to give a lecture. And I'm sure you're going to forgive me if I kind of recycle something I already presented to in a conference. But I really, 5 minutes ago, I was asked to give a lecture on a topic which is to some extent related to the topic linguistics or language and politics, how was the name of the guy? Yeah, Lane Green was supposed to give. And I'm going to talk to you today about, as I say, the related topic, namely linguistic justice. We're going to see what does it mean, and especially in the European Union context. These are results of a research project I'm carrying out at the University of Humboldt, thanks to the financial support of the European Commission. And so I think I'm going to talk about 15-20 minutes, and you can see some of the results if you are interested at the end of the lecture, as I hope, on my website in a paper published either in Italian or in Esperanto. I'm working on an English version, but the data are available on the web. So the topic of this talk basically is the European Union, and more specifically the institutions or the bodies of the European Union. Can? Okay. No problem. Can you hear me? Yeah, better. As you probably already know, I don't know how many of you are Europeans, or they come from, or how many of you come from outside Europe, but the strange political object called European Union, which is more than 50 years old, since the beginning of the European history, I mean the European Union history, and at the beginning of the 50s, they decided to give official status to all official languages of the member states. And at the beginning of the European history in 58, when the Treaty of Rome was signed, it was relatively easy because we had just 6 founder states and 4 official and working languages, namely French, German, Dutch, and Italian. But 50 years later, the situation is much more complicated. We have today, after the last enlargement to Croatia last year, we have something like 24 official and working languages, including very small languages in terms of speakers, such as Maltese or Irish, and 28 member states. So some people, some observers, and you can read that regularly on the press after each enlargement. Probably you're going to read again if the EU enlarges to Iceland or Turkey. I don't know, maybe Serbia. We are going to read about that again. Maybe some observers claim that this language policy, giving official status to all the official languages of the member states, following a kind of egalitarian philosophy, is not sustainable for many reasons. And the first reason is that it's too costly, they say. So some observers claim that a monolingual language policy, usually the candidate is English, occasionally Esperanto, would be much better from many points of view. It will be much less expensive, they say. And then they put forward other reasons. So, but let's first. Yeah, some people, for example, claim that the language regime is economically unsustainable, because the fact is that when you work with 24 official languages, you need to translate all very important documents, especially treaties, directives, regulations, basically European laws. You have to translate them in 24 languages, and of course takes time, takes money. And some people say that cannot work, it's too much. But actually, if you look at the real figures, these are official data, already, pretty fresh. The EU, I mean the institutions of the European Union, the bodies of the European Union, they spend more or less 1.1 billion euro per year on language services, and which is very good for our colleagues, interpreters and translators, which is very good for translation schools, because the European Commission is the largest, as they say in German, Arbeitsgeber. You don't understand here, we're a polyglot meeting, I know, we know that. And what does it mean for translators and interpreters in the world? So if basically the European Union would change its language policy, many translators would have very a lot of problems finding a new job. But anyway, these are roughly 1.1 billion euro. But this is just an absolute figure. It's not very interesting as such. We must compare it with the revenue of the European Union as a whole, so the GDP, gross domestic product, and in relative terms is 0.0085% of the income produced every year by the countries of the European Union. So something that costs less than 0.01% cannot be defined seriously economically unsustainable. So it's less than 1% of the European budget, that is the money earmarked from the member states to the European Union institutions for their work. And it costs more or less €2 per resident per year. We can also say 2.7 if we just consider people above age at least 15, because usually people who are 6 years old or 7 years old, they not learn to read, and probably they are not very interested in EU official documents. Probably also the majority of the European citizens are not interested, but anyway. And I'm not sure that every people above 15 years old can read complex documents, as my German colleagues always say. It's always difficult for them to understand German when it's bureaucratic here. Can you hear me better now? Okay. So anyway, these are details. The most important things here is that, as you can see, the cost argument is not particularly impressive. So as the cost argument say that we should reduce the number of official languages because the system is too expensive, is not really convincing. Some observers claim that using one language only, or maybe three, would increase the effectiveness of EU communication. So if you're working just in one language, it's much more effective. People will understand much better, especially in the long term, and it will improve cohesion of the EU. There's always this ideology: one nation, one language, one people. And it's coming up again in Europe 200 years later, 200 years after the French Revolution. Again, this idea that Europe needs absolutely one common language, otherwise you cannot have European citizens or European demos. So the purpose of this presentation is to test basically the validity of these two claims. As I said, of these two claims, whether the monolingual language policy would actually improve the effectiveness of the EU communication and the social cohesion. I mean, the coherence, if you want, of the EU as a whole. Well, you cannot compare something to nothing. So, in order to assess whether the current language policy of the EU based on multilingualism is more effective and fairer than something else, you must have to define what this something else is, of course. What we call in economics counterfactual. And in this presentation, we are going to make it simple. We are going to just compare two language policies. So the current language policy of the EU, the present language policy based on full multilingualism, and the monolingual language policy based on English only, because this language is the usual candidate when the observers propose monolingual language policy for the EU. We have also data for more complex language policies, including 3 official languages or 6 official languages, but the main ideas, the main results do not change very much. So the first thing is to say effectiveness. Is it true or not that using one language only would increase the effectiveness of the communication of the EU? Especially, I'm interested not in what's going on in in Brussels, in behind the curtains, right? So in the offices of the European Commission, I don't want to know what's going on there. But considering the results of the financial crisis, probably they don't do very good with their job anyway. So I'm interested here in external communication, so communication towards the citizens. And this is a very important topic because in the last European elections, I mean, language policy is something that is clearly linked to politics in general and to the type of relationship that we want to build between the state and the citizens, of course. The last European election you have seen, we observed a rise of the anti-European movements to some extent. In many countries, I mean, so-called Eurosceptics, they are the first political party in France, and we have seen also in other countries, including Holland and Greece, political parties that put in question again the legitimacy of the European Union, because they see that the European Union and the common currency created more problems than they solved, so they want to put the whole thing into question. And that clearly, if the EU does not communicate properly with citizens, it's going to have more and more problems to legitimize itself. So this is the reason why I focus here on the external communication of the EU. And it is not just because, you know, it's not just because I think that is important. I based this idea on a survey carried out by the Eurostat, so the European Agency for Statistics, 2 years ago, and published in the Eurobarometer report number, well, you see the details on the slides. And one of the questions was whether a translation from and into foreign languages play an important role in the area of participation or getting information about EU activities. So that was the question, in italics. And the majority of the European citizens said yes, so more or less 60% think that translation and interpreting play an important role in participating in the EU activities. So, you know, you can contact the European Commission, sending letters, whatever, or getting information about that. And this is not just about, you know, the European Union, don't know whether you know about it. It is not a traditional supranational organization. It has, how can we say, the power it has with respect to national states are much larger than any other international organization. The EU has exclusive competence for many policy areas, including trade, including some parts of agricultural policy. So its decisions have a direct impact on the life of EU citizens. So this is probably also one of the reasons why the majority of the EU citizens, they think that the translation play an important role. And so I think it is a good point of departure to use this to elaborate, to design an indicator that reflecting the effectiveness of communication of the EU. And this is what in the literature is called the disenfranchisement rate. So basically it's very simple. It's the percentage of the population who does not understand any of the official languages. So it's 100% minus the native speaker plus those who declare to know a language as a foreign language, in this case English. So basically it's the percentage of the population who does not know English at all. So, and people who have no access to official documents because they don't understand the language in which these documents are filed. And here you see the disenfranchisement rate, so the percentage of the population that would be excluded if English were the only official language of the EU. And today you have something like, you know, 50% of the population has no clue about this language at all. Data concern 24 countries in Europe. I cannot go into detail now, but the Netherlands, Ireland, Malta, and Luxembourg, they are not included because they don't participate in this survey. But the results converge toward the same percentages, even if you use other data sets. So let's not go too much into detail. So 50% of the population aged between 25 and 64, sorry, do not understand English, and therefore half of the population would be disenfranchised if this language were the only official languages of the EU, or it is already disenfranchised today if only English is used. And we had an example during the last European elections. There were a kind of TV context between the so-called Spitzkandidaten. They used the German word also in the European Union. So the candidate to the candidate to the presidency of the European Commission. You know, Mr. Barroso is going to step down shortly. So we have to find a new president of the European Commission. And before the election, there were a kind of TV context between the 5 or 4 candidates at the University of Maastricht, and only English was used. That means that half of the European population could not understand a word of what's going on. But as we all have learned at the school, you cannot make the sum of apples, bananas, and something else, you know, salad, you know, because you cannot make the sum of things that are not exactly the same thing. And basically, I'm joking a bit here with numbers, because we cannot really seriously say that those who declare to be to have a basic knowledge or a fair knowledge of a foreign language, in this case English, can understand documents. So if we look, one of the good things of this survey is that we can make a distinction between the level of knowledge, self-declared, self-assessed, the level of knowledge of foreign languages, and we have 4 degrees. So basic, fair, good, and proficient. And proficient is the good one, I would say. Proficient is formally defined as I can understand a wide range of demanding text, such as, you know, regulations, legal text, and use the language flexibly. I master the language almost completely. So if we want to be, you know, probably, you know, to have an idea of what are the language competences of the European citizens, we should probably restrict ourselves to native speakers of a language and those who declare to know one foreign language at the proficient level. And if we do this, so if you compute the... Sorry? Yes, probably yes. Yeah. So we are working here with survey data. Okay, so basically these surveys are made by telephone. You cannot explain to the interviewees what B1, C1, C12 means, because otherwise we simply put down the phone and we're going to lose the guy. So they just use 4 generally, you know, defined level of competence, but at least they are defined. Very simply, but they are defined. So if you make the sum, therefore, if you consider as people, someone is not disenfranchised either, whether he or she is a native speaker or if she or he knows the language at a proficient level. Well, if you compute that way, you see that 80% of the European citizens, or residents at least, either they're not native speaker of English or they don't know it at the proficient level. So using just this language as the language for the European polities will disenfranchise between 50 and 80% of the European citizens. And this will far away from any effectiveness of any definition. This is, you see also here 4%. That's interesting, because also using 24 official languages is not totally enough. This is why, you know, in this survey also migrants are included. And there are many people, including myself, living abroad and without extremely good knowledge of the local language. So we don't have the time now to go too into detail, but many people in France and in Germany, they belong to minorities, and these people, they don't speak fluently or at proficient level local languages, so they will be disenfranchised even if, even now in the situation in which French and German are official languages of the EU. So we have to take care about that. And this 4% includes also the Russian-speaking minority in the Baltic countries. They are a member of the European Union, but they are not. Russian is not an official language, so they are to some extent excluded. Well, this is not very important now. So the first claim that the monolingual language policy would be much more effective is clearly contradicted by the data we have. Okay. So let's now turn to the second question, whether using one language, following to some extent the model one language, one state of the 19th century, which I think polyglots, they don't accept. It is not in your DNA, as they say today. But anyway, some people still think that many languages slow down the work. There are language barriers. They create problems, and we are going to have European people only if we do like the Americans. And by the way, they are becoming bilingual because they have the Spanish minority. So we, people speaking about, some stage. I remember when I was a PhD student, I read in a book. It was a sentence of two Australian sociolinguists claiming that they said, languages are to some extent like sex. Since everyone use them, everyone thinks to be an expert on that. And it's true because you have this kind of folkslinguistics, some journalists and people without any knowledge of sociolinguists or language planning, they write about their ideas and they make proposition without any kind of empirical support, and just because they have heard somewhere that it was a time when Latin was the lingua franca of Europe and it would be good to have another one. Anyway, so these people usually say that will be the cohesion of Europe will increase if we just have one language, and this is the most interesting part, at least to me, of the project I'm carrying out. So assessing the distributive consequences of language policy. That is, who is going to lose, who is going to win if the language policy were changed. And this is the topic of what's a kind of buzzword now in the academia, linguistic justice. So here you see some references. So the question is, what's going on? What would be the consequences of a change in the language regime of the EU? So moving from 24 official languages to one language only, in terms of the distribution of the disenfranchisement rate across social groups. Yes, we don't have the time to go into detail now because I want to give some time for questions. But look at this interesting table. You see, there's a clear statistical correlation. Statistically significant correlation between the knowledge of English in general, no matter to which level you speak it, and income. In all countries considered. Well, in some countries it's stronger, especially Portugal and Romania. In some countries like Germany, Italy is less strong, but in any case positive and statistically significant. And this means that there is a correlation between the disenfranchisement rate, so the level, the knowledge of English as a foreign language, and your income. So usually people, the richer, let's say, so people with a relatively higher income tend to know better foreign languages, and therefore they will suffer less from disenfranchisement if English were the only language of the EU. Whereas people with a relatively low income, they tend to be not proficient or in any way to do not know in foreign languages in general and English in particular, so they will tend to be more disenfranchised if English were the only official language of the EU. And we observe a similar correlation, here we have more precise data, on the correlation between disenfranchisement rate and the level of education achieved by EU residents. So see that, the current language regime, because it uses the mother tongues of the European citizen, does not create differences among residents according to the level of education they achieved. But using one language only, in this case English, would disenfranchise 20%, totally disenfranchise, of those who have tertiary education, means university level education, but 50% of those who have an upper secondary education, so basically gymnasium, high school, and 72% of those who have lower secondary education, so those who have studied till they were 13, 15 years old, so something like that. So there's this table and the previous one helped us to understand what will be the consequences of language policy in terms of distribution of resources, symbolic and material resources in society. And this is the most important thing in this paper. And I want to confirm these conclusions through this last slide, where you see there's a contingency table where you see the correlation to some extent between disenfranchisement rate and the main occupational status of EU residents. And you see that the disenfranchisement rate, so is actually higher among the weaker group of society, the weakest group of society. So unemployed people, retired people, disabled, and people fulfilling domestic tasks, which is a category usually linked to gender. Those who carry out the job will suffer less from disenfranchisement, linguistic disenfranchisement, if English were the only official language of the EU. Well, these are my conclusions, and this is the most important things that beyond the numbers. Empirical evidence available, therefore, show that the monolingual language policy today, based on English only, but nothing will change if there were just 3 official languages such as English, French, and German. It's not English as such. Is you know, the idea of monolingualism or oligarchic lingualism will not necessarily be less expensive, because more than half, well, almost 0.5% of the European citizens, to some extent 80% of residents, will be excluded from communication, and they will have to pay themselves to be able to understand what the EU says. So probably in the aggregate, the policy will be much more expensive. In any case, using one language only will be much less effective than the current language regime. And this is more important. The most important thing to me is that this policy would have significant regressive distributive effects among social groups, and this is the topic of linguistic justice. That means regressive, in the theory of taxation, means that you're going to disadvantage the disadvantaged people. Okay. Progressive means that the taxes are going to be higher if your income increases. Regressive means that you're proportionally going to tax more those who are those who have a relatively lower income, and moving today, but also in the foreseeable future, towards a monolingual language policy would basically disenfranchise. Well, it would concentrate, will disenfranchise more specifically the weaker section of society. So those with a with the average or lower level of education, those with an average or lower level of income, people fulfilling domestic tasks, unemployed, etc. So these results support the idea that translation and interpreting, so today using basically the mother tongues of European citizens, and I don't go now in the thorny question of minorities, but the majority of the European citizens use as a mother tongue one of the 24 official languages of the EU. So using this language regime to some extent contribute to the social cohesion of the EU, because it does not create differences among European residents on the basis of income, occupational status, or level of education achieved. And well, this is not very important. This is what we can discuss about that later if you want. But I thank you very much for your attention. Here you have some references, and I hope we still have a couple of minutes for questions.
I heard about this grant report some years ago, in which there were some, I think 6 scenarios, and one of them, so one was multilingualism, one was oligolingualism, one was only English monolingualism, and also there was mono Esperanto, so only Esperanto monolingualism. What about comparing the data between only English and only Esperanto monolingualism?
Yeah, we are talking about 2 different things. That report you're referring to was published in 2005. Let me see if I have the reference here. No, but anyway, I can give it to you if you want. Some of you are interested. It was the guy there, which by the way was my ex-PhD supervisor, compared 3 scenarios, but the context was compare the teaching of foreign languages in the educational systems. So how much do we spend in Europe to teach foreign languages in the school system, especially in compulsory school system? And as a result, the conclusion basically was that thanks to to some extent the hegemony of English in Europe, the UK earns something like 1% of the GDP every year, thanks to selling courses and language training, etc. But this presentation deals with something different, which is the external communication of the EU. And according to the data we have, if Esperanto were the only official language of the EU, probably 99% of European citizens would be disenfranchised. The idea is, if you want to decrease the disenfranchisement rate, of course, you have to teach languages. So to move towards a common language, you can also do this with other languages. We can also use Estonian as the only official language of the EU. In principle, you just have to teach it. But then, there are other, the situation is getting more complicated for other reasons, and symbolic reasons, political reasons, and also because the main question is that, can we really and seriously ask to European citizens to accept the EU as a legitimate political body if these institutions do not speak the language of the people? This is the main question. And I'm not talking about what's going on in the floors, in the small offices in Brussels, but the real communication between the EU and the citizens. And for Esperanto, I think there will be a great role within the EU institutions as a pivot language, for example. And but maybe we don't have the time now to go too much into detail. I think there was another question. Maybe you have the time. Was a guy? Yes.
So you did show in your presentation that poor people understand less English, but the issue at hand is if we translate political text into English. So the correlating question would be if poor people understand less good political text.
Yeah.
That would be actually the comparison that would be interesting. Is there any evidence or any knowledge about that?
This is a very, very common criticism. And yes. So I don't know if relatively poor people understand legal text worse than rich people. Probably yes, but this is true also in your native language. What I'm saying here is that if you, in addition to that difficulty, you also add the language barrier, people will be even less involved in European politics than if they, as today, if they can at least have access to official documents. But look, it is not just about regulations and legal documents here. We are dealing about also websites. As I say, the EU is very powerful, and many, I don't have the time to go into detail now, but many grants or subsidies to companies, they are made available through the web. These are not very complex texts, just web pages about what are your rights and what should you do, procedural things to have access to grants and other official calls of the European Union. And very often these calls are just in 3 languages or just 1. So meaning that, this is the main point I want to make clear here, is that language policy is not just about culture or identity, is something that affects the participation of the citizen to politics, so the democratic identity of an institution, and language policy can also create asymmetries and inequalities among companies, firms, and also national states. So it's something really that can, to some extent, bias competition among companies and so or disenfranchised citizens. It's something that has really, language policy, political and economic consequences can be very serious.